Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about how to make custom views that can be reused and adapted in different scenarios of the view hierarchy. And for that we're gonna use for profit the environment. So to start with, let me show you what's the problem that we are trying to solve. Let's just make a view that is gonna sit at the leaf of the tree on the view hierarchy. And this view is gonna start by just having an image that we can use with the SF symbols and a text that we can just take from here. And of course we want to put this in a VStack so we can see them both together. And then we're gonna make a parent view, because the point that I want to make today is how this leaf view, it can be used in different places, and we wanted to make it smart enough for it to adapt to these different scenarios. So for that, let's make a parent view that is gonna start very simple, just with an H tag and 3 instances of this view that we are gonna play with. And of course, we need to now use this view as our content. And here we have an H tag with 3 views that are the ones we want to make smarter in a way. So what is the scenario that I want to discuss and fix today? So many times when we make leaf views like this, where we have fonts and images and we want to tweak the colors and the font sizes and all that stuff, the obvious thing that you want to do is to go here and say, okay, the font for this text should be the title, for example. So we see it big and nice. But what happens then when you want, in specific scenarios, to override this font from the outside? Because of course, that's not exactly the way that swiftui wants us to think about the stuff, right? So in a way, what swiftui wants is like for us to do the other way around. That from the higher levels, from the parent, we could say, I want all these list views to be a big font, right? And then your view adapts automatically because it's part of the hierarchy and the environment passes all this information down to the text, right? So it goes from the top to the bottom. It goes from the parent telling that you want everything to be using the font title, and then at the bottom, the children, the leaf view, it's gonna see, oh, I want to use the title for the text, so here you have it, right? And this is very flexible, right? Because you can just put this in one of them, and now you have only one of them in that specific scenario that you want to emphasize this title, but not on the others. But the problem is that this works very quickly as soon as you put this configuration on the leaf view. Then there is no way for the parent to say, no, on this specific scenario, I want it to be smaller. For example, if you want to make, like, let's say this one, I want it to be a footnote. You cannot do that because the information, again, thanks to the environment, goes from the parent to the children. So this means that by the time the information goes into the text and the text decides how to render itself and which font needs to pick, it's gonna see this one, not the other one. This is how it's supposed to work, and it's the key for the swiftui to work in the way it works, and really there is no other way for it that it could work. Otherwise it would be very confusing if the environment went the other way around, or if things didn't work as they are intended, it will be very, very confusing. Other things that we may want to do with this, it's change, for example, the foreground color of the text. So let's say that we want it to be red, right? This applies the same principle. We can do it from above, but if we put it here, we can also do it specifically for this view. And that's usually how you start, right? You're building your custom view and you want to configure it with specific requirements and following the design that you have been given, but then things grow, you want to reuse these things in multiple places, and then you start wondering how the heck I can accommodate for all the different scenarios while still reusing this specific view. And another thing that we maybe want to do is like set the image scale here for large, for example. So this is kind of the design that we want this view to have, but now we want it to be adapted in different scenarios. For example, we want this one to use a footnote, but that doesn't work, right? We want this image here to be small, for example, and that doesn't work. And we, for example, want this text, because it will look nice on the context where it is, to always be green. And none of that works, right? Because again, all this information goes to the parent, to the children, and here it's overwritten and it takes priority. In this case, we see how the image changes the color because we're not specifying the color of the image. If we move this into the stack itself, then we will be overwriting it for the image. But let's keep it like it was. So enough about talking about the problem, and let's see how we can build a solution. How we can do it, so I want my text to be the title because that's how I want it to look, but I want to respect the preferences of my parent, the context where I am, and if they decide that in that specific case it should be a footnote, I want to respect that. So let's see how we can use that, again, using the environment. So we can reach into the environment and we can find the font that it's injected through the environment. This font in the environment turns out that it's optional. So if for some reason it's not there, that tells us that the parent above on the hierarchy, nobody has specified a font. We can use that to decide which font to use. Here we could say use the title, but only if the font is nil. Otherwise, use the font that I'm giving from my parent. And here you immediately see how we are respecting the font. So here from the parent we are setting a font and that is respected. And the text that we have here is using the footnote, while on the others it's using the title, which is the default we're specifying here because that's how we want our view to be looked most of the time, but not always. Now let's pause here and see an alternative way of doing exactly the same, of transforming the environment so by the time the font property on the environment reaches the text, we have been able to change it, which is literally what we are doing here, right? But it's true that it looks a little bit weird that we are checking if this font is nil and stuff like that. And then we have this property here that reaches into the environment for kind of just a check, right? It's like we don't really want to use this font. It's like we use it here because we want to just pass it around. But if it was for us, it would be much better to just check, hey, if the environment doesn't have this one, put this font, right? So instead of doing this through the environment, we can actually use a modifier that it's called transform environment. And it looks and plays exactly the same that we were trying to do. So we can reach for the font on the environment, and now we're given a closure with an in-out variable which reflects this thing that we are reaching on the environment, in this case the font. So we're getting the font here. And now we have access to the font on the environment and we can mutate it in place. So here we can do exactly the same thing that we were trying to do, but in a more kind of straightforward to understand way. So we can just say if the font was nil, in that case, I want to put title. But if not, I don't want to touch it. Whatever was there, I don't touch it, right? So that's another way of doing, again, it's the same thing, it's just a different style. This seems to me like a little bit, like even if it has a little bit more code maybe, and so you can inline it in the same way that you do it here, the fact that it says you're transforming the environment kind of tells me that you wanted to reach for this font, but not really for your own purposes, just because you wanted to override it somehow, right? And I don't know, for me it feels like it's more understandable in a way. Now, this thing we just did, it's actually amazing because it allows us to use this view and have our preference of font size of the title, the style that we want is that one, but that we respect what the parent specifies if for some reason the parent wants to use a different font in different scenarios, right? This is great for reusability and making sure that our custom views adapt to the environment and to the different circumstances that they are put in. So now let's do the same, but with the image scale. So in this case, we want the first view to use a small image scale instead of this large one. So let's try to play the same trick. Instead of forcing the image scale to be large, let's use the transform environment and let's grab the image scale from the environment. And here we have now the image scale and we can modify it, right? So we can just copy this thing here, put it here and say, if the image scale was nil, please use the large one. Otherwise, use the one that was there already. Sadly, this doesn't work. The point is that image scale, as you can see if you ask the compiler, it's not optional. So it's always there. There is always a default. This is unfortunate because it doesn't allow us to check if the parent had a preference, right? The whole thing that we are doing here with the font, this check, the real question we're asking, like if we could talk like in plain English, will be, parent, do you have a preference for the font? Yes or no? If not, I'm gonna use mine. That's the real question that we're asking here. We're just using this because this is the API that we have. We can check for nullability and then react to that. In this case, we cannot check for nullability. Of course, we could check for the default, which I presume is medium, and of course, it should be a different. But that doesn't help us because we don't know if that medium is the one that is set by default and the parent didn't care about it and we should overwrite it, or if it's there because the parent actually put it in there, right? We don't have a way to distinguish this. So unfortunately, we cannot use the same trick with the image scale. But let's take a look at the third scenario. On the third scenario, we are wanting to play with the foreground color. And to be honest, for me personally, this is the situation I found myself most in, because usually you have this leaf view where you want to specify a foreground color for the text, and even sometimes you have some logic that, I don't know, based on validation or on the specific state of that view, you want to change to one color to another. But then you sometimes want to force that color for some reason because in a specific context, like whatever. But if you are in a situation, you will want to do the same. Hey parent, do you want a specific color? If so, I'm gonna respect it. If not, I have my logic that checks the state and validation, and I'm gonna use that. That's what we want to do. So again, let's play with this and let's try to transform the environment again to pick the foreground color. But of course, the foreground color is not part of the public environment. There is nothing about foreground colors or styles or anything like that. You have this color scheme and you could check if it's dark mode, but like that's not what we want to do here. If you look online, many of the answers are like, oh, you just check for the color scheme and you pick the color that you want. But that's not what we want here. I have my colors. My colors automatically respect the color scheme. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is the fact that I want to respect the specific color that a parent, that the context sets for me. And unfortunately, there is no way to do that because Apple hasn't provided many of the modifiers that are in swiftui the public access through the environment. This modifier, the foreground color, goes through the environment because we can see here how we're setting it here, and if I don't do this, it's green. So it has crossed the environment from this view to this vstack and into the text and even into the image. And if I overwrite it here, you can see how we are overwriting it through the environment. The image is still green, but the text now is forced to be red. But you cannot access that. That part of the environment, it's kind of private, it's inaccessible for us, which also means that we cannot check if the parent did something with it, if the parent wants a specific color, or it's just because it's there in default. We cannot even check that. At least with the image scale, it's there, so you can do something, not perfect, but yeah, you know, you could put some logic in there. But with the foreground color and other important modifiers, that's not the case. They are not public available and there is nothing you can do. So what's the conclusion here? Overall, I think this is an amazing technique to make our views adaptable to different situations. Unfortunately, the swiftui environment as of today on iOS 16, it's not where I wish it to be. Take a look yourself. If you find anything that you want to control and override that it's on the environment and it's optional and it's there publicly, then you can actually do this technique. Otherwise, you just need to pass specific parameters on the initializer of the view, make your own custom modifiers. These are both techniques that I've used to make my views more adaptable, but it's not nice. If you go with custom modifiers, it's very tricky to do because as soon as the modifier it moves from one place to the other, then you are not applying the same thing anymore, and it's kind of complicated, and people doesn't want to think how your specific view works, right? It should just work like swiftui works by default. Unfortunately, we cannot do that. So yeah, pass the colors on the initializers and things like that. It's not very nice, but it's the only alternative you have if you want to overwrite it locally but respect the parent context. So that's it for today. a little weird of this video because I didn't have like a nice solution, a victory at the end. But I think it's important sometimes to not only show the good techniques, the things that work, but also the things that don't work. The things where the API, it doesn't work as we expected and there is no solution, where we are stuck with how the system works, unless we want to go with a reflection and do weird things that I don't recommend. So here it is. I hope that in future swiftui versions, Apple opens a bit more the internals and these environments, which is kind of what I keep saying about swiftui. It's very nice, it's almost perfect, like I love it, but it's just that I think that Apple keeps being a little bit too greedy on what they close. Understandable, because they have to support things forever virtually. So it makes sense that they are a little bit reticent into showing some things, but this specific case, especially the foreground color, please share it. I just wish that they were more open, and in future versions of UI, maybe we can make our views smarter. Because to be honest, when you look at Apple's views, they do a lot of adaptability, and they even say that's a big part of how swiftui works, right? Adaptable views. You put a button inside a list and it automatically behaves like if it was a button on a table view with a disclosing indicator. All this stuff, which is pretty impressive, although sometimes surprising, it's still one of these aspects of swiftui API design that I'm still questioning. I'm not sure if I would have preferred to be more explicit in many places and not so much automatic magic. You know, people conflict that with swiftui itself. In my opinion, it's just that some parts of the framework have opted for this magic, but that doesn't detract that the framework is amazing and the declarative system, it's there for our benefit, right? So hopefully Apple, reflects a little bit on these decisions and makes it a little bit more clear and helpful for everybody. But that's it for today. Thank you all for watching. Press that like button if you have learned something, or if you're as sad as me as that we cannot use the foreground color in the way we want it, and please subscribe for more content like this. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.